Good evening. This is Team 6 in Lab 30 presenting the legacy of Enron, and my name is Margaret Martin. First off, I want to go over some of the objectives we will be covering in this presentation. First, we have a short video over Enron. Then we will cover the background of Enron, the internal and external flaws of Enron, the collapse of Enron, the effects of Enron on society, and finally, Enron's legacy. And now for a short video on Enron.
On 16 years to go from about 10 billion of assets to 65 billion of assets. It took them 24 days to go bankrupt.
The fatal flaw at Enron was pride, arrogance, intolerance.
Well, that's why you guys stole from those poor grandmothers.
We can add $1 gazillion to the bottom line.
All right, that sounds fantastic.
Did you convert stock worth $66 million?
I don't know. I netted approximately $100 million.
Enron is a company that deals with everyone with absolute integrity.
Argue about my compensation, and if I step on somebody's throat on the way, that doubles it. Well, I'll stomp on the guy's throat.
The other thing about people at Enron is a lot of them were former nerds. You wanted to be the most popular guy on Wall Street, and you were going to do whatever you had to do.
They sought out every loophole they could in order to profit.
The rules weren't quite clear.
They could bury debt, they could bury losses.
An industry that was very reliable for 100 years was all of a sudden turned into a casino.
Those guys could just yank the California economy on its leash whenever they wanted to, and they did it, and they did it, and they did it.
Steal money from California to the tune of $1 million or two a day.
Could I predict phony energy crisis as a result of deregulation? Yes. Could I predict that Arnold Schwarzenegger would be our governor as a result of deregulation?
Oh, I didn't expect that. How exactly does Enron make its money?
Accounting doesn't get that creative.
I would like to know if you are on crack.
This is the shredded evidence that came out of Enron.
Everyone was on the bandwagon, and it can happen again.
We are the good guys. We were on the side of angels.
It has evolved to the corporate crime of the century.
Enron was created in 1985 when Internorth purchased Houston Natural Gas. Enron then transformed itself from a gas company to a gas and electrical giant. It climbed to the 7th largest US corporation. Enron provided gas and electricity to a plethora of companies around the world. Enron was primarily focused on trading in energy derivative markets. They quickly became a massive, successful corporation, which led to power-hungry decision-making and lies. In October of 2001, Frank Lutz, a political and communications consultant, did a focus group at Enron with employees from all levels. Through his 9-page report, he noted some very negative and troubling facts about how the employees feel and how the company was run. Enron would pride itself in being the best and being innovative. The employees knew that, so when stock prices would drop, so would their morale. This undoubtedly led to uneasiness and insecurities with employees, which senior management didn't seem to care too much about. Frank preached that the greatest and most powerful tool for communicating to employees is the CEO. There was an employee crisis, and Ken Lay needed to lead them. Among the employees, there was chaos, instability, and uncertainty, and this had become a permanent part of Enron's culture. Even the VP felt the chaos was in the everyday work life, which caused a lack of overriding strategy at the top. The constant reorganizations were frustrating for everyone, and they never seemed to last long enough to actually work. Another VP felt like they were acting like a small dot-com startup and not a major US corporation. Employees needed a clear vision for where Enron was heading, and Ken Lay was not providing it. Enron had the best of the best employees, but there was a clear divide between the traders and everyone else. They were the deal makers, and they were bringing in the money. This was another morale destroyer for employees. Those involved in PRC felt underappreciated and that the work was punishment. It shouldn't have been. It's a very important business aspect. People hardly understood the PRC and its changes, with no supervisors to come explain it to them. There was a clear lack of trust with the HR department, and employees were frustrated when no one was responding or fixing their problems. Ken Lay did not know how to properly communicate with his employees. A direct quote from one VP of Enron. It's utterly unrealistic to maintain morale when the people above us don't play the game properly.
Hey guys, my name is Mitch and I'm going to cover what led to the fall of Enron. Like Margaret mentioned before, Enron became a huge corporation throughout its 16 years of operations. Through this rise in power, Enron became involved with very shoddy and questionable business practices that would ultimately lead to the fall of the company. Enron began to be involved in illegal trading and financial practices to inflate revenues and hide their debt to look more appealing to investors and creditors. Enron was found to have been manipulating various financial and market reports, as well as audits to make financial and competitive advantages. Enron, over the years leading up to its bankruptcy, was responsible for various money laundering operations and was also known to commit mail fraud, securities fraud, and as well as general conspiracy to commit illegal actions for financial gain. To gain more funding and investing, Enron would actively hide its market losses and trading losses, as well as exaggerate its income projections to entice companies and creditors to trade and invest with Enron. A couple of years before the Enron scandal blew up, Enron was accused of doing illegal internal trading with itself and other businesses to intentionally raise energy prices during the 2001 California energy crisis. Enron and other companies had partnered together to manipulate the market to drive up the price of electricity and charge the residents of California a high premium on their electricity usage. And now I'm going to pass it to Ryan to cover Enron's flaws.
Hey guys, I'm Ryan. I'm going to be covering some of the internal and external flaws that Enron had. So for starters, whenever we're looking at the internal environment of Enron, we could see that it wasn't really the best environment, especially for employees. It seemed like the Enron's executives designed a system that was intentionally built to limit communication and keep everybody else in the dark besides themselves. For example, one aspect of the system, which was touched on earlier, is the constant reorganizations they had. And to put it into more of a perspective, a typical business would do one, maybe two reorganizations in an 18-month period, compared to Enron, who was doing a 5 or 6 reorganizations in an 18-month period. And from the point of view of directors, they said that they couldn't even stay in a single position long enough to see the results from a particular period. And employees have said that this limits communication and makes it hard for them to get comfortable in their different positions. Employees have also said, which was also covered on a little bit earlier by Margaret, that there was no overriding strategy at the top, that the left hand had no idea what the right hand was doing at any given moment. And this strategy for the future was in terms of both the company as a whole and also on an individual level for the employees as to what role they would play in the future of the company, if they would even play a role at all. And then just to demonstrate further the level of unhappiness amongst employees in Enron, there was a focus group consisting of 30 managerial employees and associate level employees. And of those 30, 26 of them, which is 87%, said that they were actively planning an exit strategy from Enron, which clearly shows just a general unhappiness. And it was just Enron's strategy, or Enron's system that they have built. It didn't do anything but promote a feeling of uncertainty and chaos amongst employees, and it promoted the idea of secrecy, all of which became part of Enron's culture, and it translated over into the public realm as well, which we can go to the next slide. For starters, Enron completely and deliberately failed to accurately report financial information, such as revenue levels and debt levels. If you look at this graph in the lower left-hand corner, which shows Enron's reported revenue levels compared to the reported revenue levels of other companies that are of similar size to Enron, it's easy to see that Enron's is way higher than all the other companies, and which we now know that this was just an overstated value. It wasn't true at all. And then, I mean, Enron didn't only overstate revenues, it also understated debts or just didn't state information at all. And the reason they were able to do this is most of their fraudulent transactions were through partnerships that were headed by their own officers. And basically what that means for Enron is everybody who was directly involved in these fraudulent transactions were basically benefiting from it. So, and at the time, they weren't really giving a lot of information to the public about these partnerships, but we now know that some of these partnerships were inflating revenues by hundreds of millions of dollars. And despite this, Enron repeatedly was assuring the public that their finances were healthy, which they weren't. And just to demonstrate it even further, during a meeting with a credit agency, Enron reported that there was going to be a $1.2 billion decrease in shareholders' equity. And this decrease was so significant that several credit analysts privately urged Enron to report it to the Securities and Exchange Commission, which they just completely ignored and did not do it at all. And it's just situations like this that ultimately led to the collapse of Enron and negatively affected hundreds of thousands of people. You can go to the next slide.
So for the collapse of Enron, based on the graphs Ryan showed previously, you can see the downfall of Enron and how its illegal business practices came back to haunt the company. All of the illegal activity Enron was involved with slowly caught up to them as the media and the public began to uncover the truth to what was going on. A big turning point was in 2001 when Arthur Andersen incorrectly audited a deal Enron had created with one of its partners, which resulted in a massive market loss, as well as huge financial losses to Enron and the partner, which resulted in the company going bankrupt. On October 1st, Enron accountant Sharon Watkins noticed the incorrect auditing Andersen had created and took this information to the CEO. Sharon was told that this was a pointless error and there was nothing to be worried about, and so she went to the SEC and reported the fraud Enron had committed. Sharon Watkins blew the whistle on Enron and spurred the entire scandal. This eventually led to all the illegal activity Enron and its partners were involved in. Ultimately, this scandal led to the official collapse of the company in 2007, with over 30 employees charged and a debt of around $70 billion to be paid back to creditors and investors. And I'm going to pass it over to Connor to close us out.
Hello, I'm Connor, and some of the effects of Enron's unethical activities were investor confidence dropping dramatically. Shareholders lost a total of $74 billion, and stock prices dropped from $90 a share to less than $1 in a little over a year. Around 4,000 employees were laid off after bankruptcy claims. Billions of dollars in pension funds were lost due to the corruption. Enron executives were criminally prosecuted and punished, around 30, I believe. The next slide. Enron's legacy drew attention to accounting and corporate fraud. New regulation and compliance measures were passed. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act was passed in 2002, which tightened the grip of all financial recordings throughout the industry. Financial Accounting Standards Board raised its standard of ethical conduct to tighten down on business ethics. Changes in corporate governance. Director boards, for the most part, have become more active and independent throughout the organization. And the next slide. To the conclusion, the events of Enron revealed an industry-wide focus on profitability and productivity that often overlooked ethical boundaries, and corporate America's reputation faltered as a result of that. This corporate glorification of a result-driven environment translated poorly to the public, and the negative perception required major revision to industry values. Regaining the public's trust demanded transparency throughout all levels of an organization. Deal makers do not necessarily make great leaders was often cited by many employees at Enron. Enron's structure of leadership was questionable, benefiting mostly those who impacted the bottom line positively. Enron's lack of employee confidence quickly found its way to investors, dropping company value and support almost immediately. Investors couldn't rely on management positions that didn't have the backing from lower level employees. The communication was not there. Public frustration with Enron began in 2000 after the company raised energy costs for the residents of California. Affected communities were left without a clear understanding from the muted company, all stemming back to their lack of communication and transparency. Thank you.